Hey everyone, it's Matt from Zen Shop. And today I wanted to give a little tour of the apps that I'm building with Flutter and provide you some interesting feedback on my experience with building applications with Flutter and hopefully share the knowledge around building complicated apps with Flutter. I gave a little video about my experience with Flutter last week, and now I want to show you the actual applications. So the goal of the app that I'm building is going to run on 5 platforms. It's going to run in the web. It's going to run on desktop, and that's Mac OS, Windows, and it's also going to run on mobile and Android. So two of those platforms behave quite differently, and that's Android and iOS. So you can see on the right, we've got the mobile app, and on the left, we've got the desktop app. And the reason why mobile behaves differently is because the way you hold it and use the app, I want it to feel a little bit different because navigating around this application, you need to, you know, uh, you can't show so much information on one screen. So you can see on the desktop app, we've actually got 4 panels expanded, whereas on the mobile app, we've got a single panel. But what's interesting is the a lot of the functionality that you build with a Flutter application, you can share across all of these different platforms. The mobile app, um, it's essentially doing the same thing most of the time. It's just laid out a little bit differently. Um, so uh, okay, so let's start from the beginning. How do we move around this app? So I built it with a thing called Beamer. It's a Flutter package. I did look at several other strategies of um, routing, but Beamer is the one I settled on. I found it very useful because it supported all the functionality I needed for building these apps. And I struggled quite a lot with Go Router, which is another package for doing shell routes. Perhaps it's just my lack of understanding of that package, but I found Beamer to be a lot easier to use. So I've stuck with Beamer now. And so far, all of the complex use cases that I have been satisfied with Beamer. So I'll give you an example of the types of navigation that we're talking about here. So this one, if you click on Inbox, for example, you'll see it's changed this panel and it's filtering the results obviously to your inbox. And on this one, or let's say this one, I click on waiting and then it filters the results to the waiting tickets. So that's actually a navigation, right? And then the same thing is true on mobile. So if I click on waiting, it then slides in the waiting tickets and you can see those tickets. But the difference between mobile and uh, desktop is we persist certain parts of the navigation stack there on the screen. So we've navigated from here to here, but we've kept the conversation screen available to see. And also, from what you can see up here as well, is you can navigate between different conversations. So, for example, if I click on these things, the conversation stays the same when you move around. But then if I click on this one, this is a new conversation, you'll notice that this slider will move, and you'll actually go to that conversation when you click on it in the list. So that's actually a fairly complicated part of the application is simply just moving around the application. But I've solved it. And I would say, compared to many other application frameworks for building these things, I think Flutter has solved it quite well. And I love the approach that they've taken as well, because they've opened it up in a sense to have lots of different ways of doing this. I do know that, for example, in SwiftUI, my little experience of SwiftUI, routing is fairly taken care of you, let's say, by Apple, and you've got to sort of fit in within Apple's way of doing things. Um, and you know, you may not you may find that limiting in some way. I don't know exactly why, but um having the opportunity to have different packages solve this problem is quite useful. And I've appreciated Flutter's approach here of using some open source packages for doing routing. And I'll just give you one more example here as well. Now, when you click on the conversation on mobile, you see it there. So we've got the conversation going, and you've also got this tab bar at the bottom. So this is another thing that's a little bit different between mobile and desktop. Is the mobile app uses a tab bar, and then the tab bar obviously tabs between different screens. So we've done this on order of importance really, because on the mobile side, it's kind of less important, let's say, where you are on exactly which conversations you're looking at, and it's more important what notifications you've recently received. Because the mobile app is going to be more focused around picking up a notification, clicking it, and going into a conversation. Whereas on the desktop, you're more focused around managing lots and lots of conversations, moving them in between different states, and therefore this view here is more important. Um, the other thing I've also found interesting about navigation in Flutter is the display of modals. So one challenge I had was uh, this screen here is let's say just a detail view, right? So we've got a conversation, but we also want to show some additional information around that conversation. So it's not necessarily the most important thing, but it's also useful, right? So it's a detail view. Now, on the mobile side, we're more focused on showing the actual messages from the user. So the detail view is less important. So what I've done is so this isn't finished yet, so the design isn't perfect. But you can see here, the detail view pops up and it comes up as a modal. Um, I found that very useful because on the desktop, I can display it like this. The only thing I found as well, which I really wish the Flutter team would provide, is this navigation sort of stack of panes, let's say. This didn't exist in the Flutter framework. Um, I had to build that myself. It wasn't terribly difficult, and you know, it's essentially just drawing different components together and allowing them to be shown and hidden like this. But having it built into the Flutter framework, they've done a lot of other widgets, and this would be a really good addition, I think, to building desktop apps, particularly because all desktop apps of any complexity will need something like this, and Flutter doesn't currently have that. Um, Swift UI does, but I would say honestly that Swift UI component, which is the navigation stack, or something similar to that name, it's very. I found it quite limiting, for the key reason that I couldn't actually show toolbar items quite the way I wanted them. So I wanted this to be on the right, and I wanted to be able to show and hide this toolbar. I couldn't figure out how to do that easily in SwiftUI. And I also wanted to show like something like this as well. That was also quite difficult. Um, yeah, so really happy with Flutter. Another thing as well is on desktop, things are going to be a little bit different from mobile because I wanted these pop-ups to give the user the ability to, you know, filter and refine their searches, or you know, log in and log out. So I created, well, I used an open source package here for popping up a modal, but it sits really nicely with the with the desktop view, and you can see something similar here as well with mobile, but again, it's different. So on the mobile side, it slides in from the bottom. I think that's more appropriate than sort of popping in from the top. It would be a sort of it's more thumbable. You can quickly, tap this and then go there rather than uh, be stuck at the top of the screen. So adapting to the platform is really, really one of Flutter's, in my opinion, most powerful features, I think. The other thing I want to show you as well, actually, is so I have to go back to the terminal. Is let's see. Yes, okay. So I'm going to build the app now, and I'm going to run it in Chrome. So this blew my mind when I first saw it because, of course, running the apps in their native form is the preferred way. Um, but having this ability as well to build them to the web is going to be a huge advantage for this next release because obviously I want to build experiences that anyone can use and potentially try out as well. And having a web interface to ZenShop is essential for that because they don't need to install anything. They can just click a link. So here we go. So this is the app. You will notice the avatar is different. Unfortunately, I'm struggling with a bug here with caching of images. Doesn't seem to be a way to expire the cache once it changes. So I'm figuring this out. But so I've changed the image, and this is a fresh cache, of course, so it's showing the latest image. But here we go. So this is Flutter compiling to the web, showing it in the web browser with a very similar experience. If you did like for like, I think you would again be hard to tell which is which. Of course, in the web app, you've got the Chrome of the browser, and you don't you see this URL bar as well. So actually, the routing behind the scenes is using a URL scheme just like this, and I love the fact that Beamer uses that because then again, it makes it compatible with a web URL, and then I can send a link to someone, and then they can run that link. And depending on whether they've got the native app installed or whether they've got simply a web browser, it will use the right app, and we can share links really well. So, um, what else can I show you as well? Yeah, so this is of course Flutter, well, ZenShop running in the web browser, as you'd expect. Pretty awesome. I haven't noticed any real major bottlenecks with Flutter running in the browser. It's just not what I'm going to be recommending for people to use, but of course they can if they want. Okay, so I'm going to close that. Go back to the app. What else? What else? Oh yeah. Okay. So one other thing as well is text input, right? So text input's really important for ZenShop. I want to make text input really easy for people to reply to their messages. So one of the things that I started with as a challenge to myself was, could I write a similar kind of interface for doing the templates and the mentioning of users? So here we go. So for example, if I type at, it popped up this little thing which lets you see that here's Matt is in your team. And if I press enter, then it's made a little note. So that's important because there's several things that are working here which are really, really useful. So number one is the ability to overlay something on top of that text field. And the other thing is to respond to keyboard events like enter and forward slash and at, and have it navigable through just the keyboard, no mouse involved. So Flutter has got that ability, and it runs across platforms. So it supports Windows and Mac OS and web. The same interactions are supported there. If I just delete this as well, go back and make it let's try a template now. So a template is different. So here you can see a preview of the template. So if I type out of stock, and then I think I press tab. No, it's not tab. It's, I think I have to press enter actually. Yeah. Okay. So if I press enter, it will then complete the template input. The only thing I have got some limitations here is the um, uh, return here. This should actually be these should be paragraphs rather than spaces. But I actually think this could be a problem with the way that I created the template, and I'm going to do a bit more research into it. But that's how it should end up being formatted. But I'm quite happy so far with this early progress of getting the templates working with ZenShop. So we're going to do some obviously more work on that. Um, the other thing as well is doing little pop-ups like this. So I've been working on getting the labels set up for ZenShop, and in order to do that, I need to be able to filter them. So, for example, high priority. There you go. So it finds the high priority label. I should be able to click on this, apply it, um, and then now it's given the conversation a high priority label. Um, So there's been some challenges that I've been struggling a little bit with Flutter on this regard. So you can see here the timeline has also updated, but you noticed it was quite a lot slower. So this has been my little bugbear currently. Is I'm able to do speculative updates, which is basically or optimistic updates. It's essentially just taking a response that you expect from the server, and then you put that into the local cache ahead of time before you've got it from the server. So then the user interface can update itself to the state that you expect it to be once the API has completed. But I'm really struggling on this part of the application, which is the timeline. So you can see there's a lot of like types of events and things going on in this timeline. And I've not managed to get the speculative updates to work for anything other than sending a message. So, for example, if I send this message now to my customer, hold on, send. Here we go. So you can see here, yeah. So that's there we go. So that's actually an example of my speculative update going wrong. Um, and so I'm really working hard on trying to figure out how to get the interface to respond as quickly as possible with speculative updates. But there are, like anything, sometimes the open source libraries are less optimal, maybe. Let's say, for example, if you go from a JavaScript stack to a Flutter stack, or a Swift stack, sometimes there'll be a really powerful library that does everything that you want, and it works beautifully. I have personally found that the GraphQL library that I'm using for Flutter is, let's say, it's good, but it's like less developed, or less it's not as good as the JavaScript ones. So if I was writing this in JavaScript, I'd probably have less work to do around speculative updates. So that's important to you with GraphQL. Bear that in mind. I've struggled with that quite a lot. But I'm sure I can work around this once I get further into the problem. So yeah, what else? Okay. Yeah, there's not much else really to show really on the apps front. We've got the mobile app, but obviously mobiles. You can do the exact same things. I do love the fact that all the stuff now that I do on the desktop client sort of mostly works on the mobile. So the mobile app itself is always going to be in step with the desktop app. So this is actually the whole reason why I started with building a Flutter app rather than building a separate app for mobile. So the traditional approach of building a mobile application is you go one of two ways. You either go with a web app for your desktop users in the web browser, and then you go for a native mobile app running separately on Android and iOS. There's two applications. So you have two applications plus a web app, so three in total, and they all have to, do the same thing. But of course, you need three different expertise. You need Android expertise, and you need iOS expertise, and you also need web expertise. That's a lot of extra coding, and it's really, really difficult to ship new features when you've got three different code bases to maintain. The other approach you can also do is building the application as a single code base with a web application stack. And this is what a lot of companies do because doing different code bases requires exponentially more coding and more expertise. Just having a single code base with a web application stack is what most people do because of that. However, as I personally think, is the web application stack is not very suitable for building complex uh, apps, really. Of course, it's doable, and you can build these applications, but it's really, really challenging to actually build them well, or responsive. They feel good. They're animated. They're not laggy. They don't have jank when they navigate between routes. Um, but of course, like modern day web frameworks like React and Remix and Next, or Vue, if you're Vue.js, they do let you do those things, and it is certainly very possible. It's just really, really difficult to make that work well. You need exponentially more uh, expertise in the web technology to pull this off, and you're going to spend a lot of time fiddling with bugs across different platforms because, let's be honest here, the web does not behave the same across all different platforms. Um, the opposite is true for Flutter. So, Flutter solves that problem really, really well. When I build the Flutter application, very rarely thinking about code changes between different platforms and solving problems specific to that platform. And the animations and the routing and the overall behavior of the application is very predictable. It's very smooth, and the quality is nearly as good as native. Of course, it's never going to be truly native, but it's like very, very close. You can see in front of me. Of course, like if you were nitpicking, you would find something about these applications that wouldn't be true, would give it away as not being a truly native app. But for the majority of users, they're not going to be able to tell the difference, and they get that wow factor of yes, this is a really slick, well built, polished native application running in their desktop. And they're also not going to have that horrible problem of your Electron app or your mobile app just dying because it's sucking all the memory and behaving strangely because JavaScript has a huge memory impact when you're running a whole browser engine per application. So Flutter compiles; it's very relatively neatly compact when it's running in a binary. And compared to an Electron app, it's a very good citizen for your task manager. It's not gonna kill your memory. So yeah, uh, I say really recommend Flutter. I'm very happy with how things are going with ZenShop. Still got more work to do to get these apps shipped. I think one of the challenges that I'm going to have to deal with next is authentication across different platforms because part of the flow for ZenShop authentication is we've got a password and email login with two-factor authentication, but we've also got OAuth. So that involves creating a web browser and then calling back into the app when the authentication is completed. So actually doing this cross-platform is strangely complicated because there's also lots of different browser engines that I need to take care of and handle. And each platform has slightly different ways of calling back into the native app. So one of the key challenges I'm going to deal with probably next week is doing authentication with OAuth with the native apps, and also the web app too. So yeah, lots of peculiarities I'm gonna have to tackle with that. I'm gonna have to try and solve this speculative update issue with GraphQL. I need to, let's say, finish off this part of the screen, which is the order information. So we're going to show the Shopify order finally. We also need to be able to merge conversations. We also need to attach files and send them off. And we also need to do the email selection. And that is actually all of the functionality left for the release of the apps. So I'm not going to do anything more above that. So I've got that cutoff period of the apps are ready at that point. So I'm thinking potentially about 3 to 4 weeks of development to get that working. I think one of the sort of challenges I have, I'm a little bit worried about, is obviously. Because these are native apps, they also need to go through a submission process with Apple and Google and Windows potentially as well. Or Microsoft. So I'm less concerned about Microsoft and Google because they're usually quite easy to publish apps to. But Apple is probably the spanner in the works here. I think they're going to probably give me a tougher time getting into the App Store. With any luck, though, the EU will be mandating Apple allows side loading of applications. So this is one thing I'm really, really keen on is the ability for everyday users to install apps without the need of going through an app store. I really think it's time now that the App Store was open to being used without the need of going through Apple itself. Uh, Developers like me, we want to focus on shipping applications and less focused on getting through a review process with Apple, who, in my opinion, has no business in reviewing my application. I know, of course, we're working on top of their platform, but really it's down to the user whether they feel there's value in your application and whether they are happy with your terms and conditions. Apple, I don't think, should have any say really in my companies and my business with my customers. And of course, though, I'm very thankful for Apple and Google for providing these wonderful phones and this new way of technology. I think it's now time that they sort of let developers be more free on their platforms and deliver great experiences and apps for their users without the encumbersome extra bureaucracy that they have layered on top of that. That's all I have to say today on building Flutter applications. And hopefully I can give you more updates soon on how the releases are going for those different platforms. I think I'll probably give an update on shipping the desktop apps first, because that's more the most important ones. So we'll do Windows and Mac OS, and we'll sign those binaries and get them on their respective app stores. And then we'll also focus on shipping the mobile apps too. Um, yeah, all right. Thanks. See you. Bye.